Now, let's discuss another problem for statement of cash flow. So, TikTok company provided the following comparative statement of financial position. So here we are presented 2 years of statement of financial position for 2020 and 2019. So the additional data does not include the income statement for TikTok company. So which means when we prepare the statement of cash flows, we will only rely on the statement of financial position and the additional data. So based on this available information, we can only prepare the statement of cash flow presented under the indirect method. Because for us to prepare the statement of cash flow under the direct method, we need to determine the nominal accounts that appear in the income statement. But since there are no income statement, we cannot determine the nominal accounts related to the operating activities. We can only prepare the indirect method approach for the cash flow statement. Now, let's start the problem. Again, I will prepare the statement of cash flow by using the expanded accounting equation. So here, on the left side are the asset accounts, and on the right side are the liabilities and equity accounts. So the beginning balances here are the amounts in the statement of financial position ending December 31, 2019, because the current year is 2020. And the ending balance will be these balances that appear in the statement of financial position as of December 31, 2020. So, in preparing the statement of cash flow under the indirect method, we will start with the net income. And how much is our net income? Based on our problem, additional data, number 1, the net income for the current year is 3,285. So the net income of 3,285 is the amount of income close to retained earnings from the income summary account in the closing entry. So after we include the net income, we will now determine the nominal accounts needed to adjust the net income of 3,285. And those nominal accounts are the nominal accounts related to investing and financing activities. Again, since we have no income statement available in our problem, we cannot determine the nominal accounts needed that are related to investing and financing activities. But since we need those nominal accounts, we need to find some other way in order for us to determine those nominal accounts. So to do this, we need to analyze each account that is related to investing and financing activity and look for the nominal accounts through that analysis. So first, let us determine the classification of each asset, liability, and equity account in the statement of cash flow. Let's start with the accounts receivable. The accounts receivable is presented under the operating activity in the statement of cash flows because this is a current asset. For inventory, this is also under the operating activity. However, the land, since this is a non-current asset, this will be classified under the investing activity together with the investment in Snapchat, the PPE, and its related contra asset account, which is the accumulated depreciation, as well as the patent. So these are all non-current accounts. Next is the liability, starting with accounts payable. So accounts payable is classified in the statement of cash flow under the operating activity. Also, accrued expenses is also operating activity. Next is the dividend payable. For dividend payable, although this is classified as current liability, there is a different way of presentation for the dividend payment. So here we are presented items of cash transactions that can be presented in other manner. So let's start with dividends. So dividends can be received or paid. So if a dividend is received, by default, this is presented under the operating activity, while the alternative presentation is under the investing activity, since the dividend is a result of an investment in equity accounts. That is why it can also be presented under investing activity. For dividend payment, there is no alternative presentation, and it should be presented under the financing activity. For interest, if an interest is received, by default, it shall be presented under the operating activity. But the alternative presentation is under the investing activity, since interest income is a result of investment in bonds or loans receivable. While for interest payment, by default, it is presented under the operating activity, and the alternative presentation is under the financing activity. Last, for income tax is presented under the operating activity. However, there are certain cash transactions that are classified under the investing and financing activities that are also subjected to tax. Those cash transactions, if it can be specified, must be presented under the investing and financing activity. However, since income tax is difficult to match, for simplicity purposes, it shall be presented under the operating activities. So now, dividends payable will be presented or will be classified under the financing activity. Next is bonds payable. Bonds payable as a non-current liability is classified as financing activity. For deferred tax liability, although this is a non-current liability, it cannot be classified under the financing activity because, as we have discussed earlier, income tax is presented under the operating activity. And although this is non-current and this is related to income tax, our basis of classification is the nature, which is income tax. So that is why the presentation or the classification shall be under the operating activity. Then for the remaining equity accounts, all of these will be classified under the financing activity. So after we have classified each account as to the statement of cash flow classification, now let's start the analysis on each account related to investing and financing activity. Again, the analysis of these accounts has two goals. First is to determine the nominal accounts related to investing and financing activity that we needed in order to adjust the net income of 3,285. And the next goal is to prepare or to determine the cash inflows and cash outflows indirect method related to the investing and financing activity. So let's start with investing activity. The first non-current asset is land. So the land has a beginning balance of 3,000 pesos and an ending balance of 4,875. So let's check whether there is a transaction affecting the land account. So based on our additional data, number 3, the fair market value of land in exchange of 57 shares issued on March 1 is 600 pesos. And in number 8, land purchase for cash of 1,275. So based on the additional data, we have 2 transactions affecting the land account. Let's include this in our accounting equation. So first is the additional data number 3. So for the additional data number 3, since it is an issuance of share capital in exchange of land, so the land is debited at fair value, which is the consideration, for 600 pesos, and credit to share capital for 57 shares multiplied by the par value per share of 5 pesos, which has a total of 285 pesos or 57 shares times 5. Then the excess of the fair value over par is credited to the share premium account for 315 pesos. Next is the additional data number 8. So the transaction is purchase of land for cash for 1,275. So the debit is land for 1,275, and for the same amount, the cash account is credited. So let us now check whether the land, based on the given data, will have an ending balance of 4,875. So beginning plus 1,275 and 600, the sum is 4,875, which is also the ending balance as of the year 2020. So now we are complete as to the land. Let's go to investment in Snapchat. So the investment in Snapchat has a beginning balance of 1,200 and an ending balance of 1,800. So let's check the problem if there are additional transactions that will affect the investment in Snapchat account. So based on the additional data, number 9, cash dividend received by TikTok from its investment in Snapchat is 150 pesos. So we only have one transaction given pertaining to our investment in Snapchat, which is the dividend received for 150 pesos. So what is the entry of the receipt of dividends? So of course, the account debited is cash for 150 pesos. What is the account credited? So the account credited is not dividend income, because dividend income is only credited if the investment is accounted for using the fair value method or the cost model. Since the investment in Snapchat is accounted under the equity method, as stated in the statement of financial position, the dividend received shall not be credited to dividend income. Instead, the account credited is the investment in Snapchat account. Always remember that dividend received from an investment in associate is always a deduction in the investment in associate account. So this means if the investment is accounted for under the equity method, TikTok company has a significant influence over Snapchat. So now let's credit investment in Snapchat for 150 pesos. Now let's check whether the ending balance is at 1,800. So 1,200 less 150, the sum is 1,050 pesos. However, the ending balance is 1,800. So This means that there is another transaction affecting the investment in Snapchat account. So how much is the additional transaction in order for us to have an ending balance of 1,800? So 1,800 minus 1,200, then plus 150. The additional transaction is an increase of 750 pesos. So since the additional data does not specify about any increase in the investment in Snapchat account for 750, we have no choice but to make assumptions. So what would be the possible assumption? Remember, under the equity method, investment in associate account shall increase if the investee or the associate reported net income. And the investor must record as an increase in the investment in associate account its share in the net income of the investee. So the possible assumption that we should make is that the 750 pesos is the share of TikTok company in the net income of the Snapchat company. So what is the entry to record the share in income? So the entry is debit investment in associate. In this case, is investment in Snapchat. And this is credited to investment income, which is a P&L account. So 750 pesos under investment income. Now, after the additional 750 pesos, now the total of the three figures is now at 1,800 pesos. Now let's proceed to PPE. The PPE has a beginning balance of 9,495 and an ending balance of 8,700. Let's check the additional data about transactions affecting PPE. So based on the additional data, we only have one transaction affecting PPE, and that is number 6, which is the sale of equipment with a cost of 795, carrying amount of 345, and cash proceeds from the sale of 285 pesos. So what is the journal entry to record the sale of equipment for cash? So for additional data number 6, the entry to record the sale of equipment is debit cash for the cash proceeds for 285 pesos. Then let's derecognize the PPE at cost. So credit PPE for 795 pesos. Then accumulated depreciation shall be debited. So how much is the accumulated depreciation? So the accumulated depreciation shall be the difference of 795 and 345, or 450 pesos. And this is debited to the accumulated depreciation account. And next is the 60 pesos loss on sale. So remember that the cash proceeds is 285 pesos. However, the carrying amount is 345 pesos. So if the cash proceeds is lower than the carrying amount, there is a loss on sale of 60 pesos. So let's first change the sign, and the 450 should be debited, so it's positive. Now let's check the PPE account if the ending balance would be 8,700. So 9,495 less 795 is 8,700, which is also the ending balance for PPE. Then let's check accumulated depreciation. So 1,500 less 450, the sum is 1,050 pesos. However, the ending balance is 1,350 credit balance, which means there is an additional transaction affecting accumulated depreciation. And how much is this additional transaction? So 1,350. then 1,500, then 450, there should be another credit to accumulated depreciation for 300 pesos. What are the transactions that requires a credit to accumulated depreciation? Of course, the most common transaction is to record the depreciation expense. So this means that the 300 credit to accumulated depreciation is the depreciation expense. So the entry would be debit depreciation expense for 300 pesos and credit accumulated depreciation. Now let's proceed to patent. The patent has a beginning balance of 495 and an ending balance of 450. Based on the additional data, there are no transactions available regarding the patent. However, since the beginning and ending balance are not the same, there is a difference between the beginning and ending balance of 45, which is a decrease. So since there is no available data in our problem about the patent, we are going to make an assumption about the 45 peso decrease. Again, what is the possible transaction that will require a credit to patent? So the most common transaction is amortization of patent. So the entry would be for the amortization is a debit to amortization expense of 45 pesos and credit to patent 45 pesos. Now, let's proceed to the liabilities. For liabilities, we will start with the accounts classified under the financing activity, starting with dividend. The dividends payable has a beginning balance of 900 pesos and an ending balance of 1,500. Let's check whether there is a transaction that is related to the payment of dividends. So for additional data, number 2 and number 7, these are both declaration of dividend. So let's start with number 2. In number 2, on February 2, the entity issued a 10% stock dividend to shareholders of record on January 15. The market price per share was 15 pesos. So for this dividend, since this is a stock dividend, this transaction has no effect on the dividends payable account because the dividends payable account only pertains to cash dividend or sometimes to property dividends. The stock dividend is never presented under the liability section because the stock dividend is presented in equity. So let's skip the number 2 data. Let's proceed to number 7. The number 7 states that the cash dividend per share declared on September 30 to shareholders of record on August 1 is 2 pesos per share. So this is a cash dividend transaction which has an effect on a dividends payable account, which is a liability account. So now let's compute how much dividend is declared for number 7. Since in the computation of the dividend payments, it requires the number of shares outstanding that are entitled to the cash dividend, we need to determine the outstanding shares as of the shareholders of record. However, we can only determine the number of outstanding shares if we are done with the share capital transactions. So let's skip for this time the dividends payable and proceed to the bonds payable. So the bonds payable has a beginning balance of 4,500 and an ending balance of 3,000 pesos. So let's check if there is a transaction affecting the bonds payable. So in additional data number 4 and number 5, there is a gain on retirement of long-term bonds for 150 pesos. And the face value of the bonds retired in number 4 is 1,500 pesos. So what is the entry to record the retirement of long-term bonds? So the entry for number 4 and number 5, which is the retirement of bond, so we have to debit bonds payable at face value, which is 1,500 pesos. Then credit gain on retirement for 150 pesos. And of course, if the carrying amount is 1,500, which is also at face value, because there is no bond premium or bond discount, and the gain is 150, so the cash payment is lower than 1,500. Because if we paid an amount below the carrying amount, that is a gain on retirement. And if we pay an amount higher than the carrying amount, that is a loss on retirement. So since in this case we have a gain on retirement, the cash payment is 1,350 pesos. And that is credited to cash. Now, let's check whether the accounting equation is balanced. So the left side has a balance of 1,350, and on the right side, 15 less 150 is also negative 1,350. Now, after we're done with the bonds payable, let's proceed to share capital. Again, we skip the deferred tax liability because this is classified under the operating activity. Remember that we are performing the analysis only for the investing and financing activities. Now, share capital. So for the share capital, there is a beginning balance of 3,150 and an increase of 285, which is a result of the issuance of share capital in number 3 in exchange of land, and an ending balance of 3,750. Now, let us check whether there is a transaction affecting the share capital account based on the additional data in our problem. So based on the additional data, aside from the number 3 transaction, that is the issuance of share capital in exchange of land, there is a transaction in number 2 that has an effect on the share capital. Because on February 2, the entity issued a 10% stock dividend to shareholders of record on January 15, when the market price of the share is 15 pesos. So let's determine the number of shares outstanding as of January 15, and these are the shares that are entitled to the 10% stock dividend. Since the beginning balance of share capital is 3,150 and the 285 peso transaction, which is issuance of share capital in exchange of land, is dated March 1 based on the additional data number 3, it means that the shareholders of record on January 15 are the outstanding shares pertaining to the 3,150 beginning balance of the share capital. So how many shares are there in the 3,150 pesos? So if the par value is 5 peso per share, so 3,150 divided by 5 is 630 shares. So the 630 shares outstanding are entitled to a 10% stock dividend. So the 10% stock dividend is 630 times 0.10. So the number of shares that are in the number of shares issued as stock dividend is 63 shares. And since the stock dividend is considered as a small stock dividend, the amount that is to be debited to retained earnings is the fair market value of the shares, which is at 15 pesos. So let us prepare the entry by using the expanded accounting equation for the issuance of stock dividend under the additional data number 2. So debit retained earnings for the declaration of the stock dividend for 63 shares, which is the 10% of 630, times the fair value per share of 15 pesos. So the total amount debited to retained earnings is at fair value because the stock dividend is a small stock dividend because it is below 20%. So the amount debited is 945 pesos. So debit retained earnings for 945 pesos. So that is negative because debit. Then credit share capital. So the share capital is credited for 63 shares times the par value of 5 pesos. So 315. Next is credit share premium. Since the fair value is greater than the par value of 5 pesos, there is a share premium. How much is the share premium? So the share premium is 63 times 10 pesos or 15 pesos minus 5. So the total is 630 pesos. Now let's check whether the share capital account will have an ending balance of 3,750. So 3,150 plus 315 plus 285, the total is 3,750, which is also our ending balance. So we're done with the share capital. Let's proceed to share premium. For the share premium, we have a beginning balance of 2,550. Then add this to the 630 and 315. The total is 3,495, which is also the ending balance for share premium. Now, the remaining accounts that we are not yet through with the analysis are the dividends payable and retained earnings. So these two accounts are related because of the dividends, since dividends are deducted from retained earnings. So let us check the retained earnings account. The beginning balance of 2,190 less 945 pesos. Then let's add the net income of 3,285. The total is 4,530. However, the ending balance is 3,030 pesos, which means that there must be a decrease in retained earnings for 1,500. So what is this 1,500 negative or debit to retained earnings? Going back to the problem, in the additional data number 7, it says here that we have a cash dividend per share that is declared on September 30 to shareholders of record on August 1 for 2 pesos per share. So we need to determine the outstanding shares as of August 1 because the shares that are outstanding on August 1 are those entitled to the 2 peso cash dividend. So how many shares were there on August 1? So going back to the share capital account, The 3,150 is the beginning balance. The 315 was issued on February 2 upon the issuance of stock dividend, and the 285 is issued on March 1, which means the ending balance of 3,750 is already outstanding as of August 1, which is the shareholders of record date for the 2 peso cash dividend. So which means the 3,750 peso shares, which is at par value, are all entitled to the 2 peso per share dividend. So how many shares are there in the 3,750 pesos? So that is 3,750 divided by par value of 5 pesos. So the number of shares outstanding as of August 1 is 750 shares. And since the cash dividend is at 2 pesos, so the total dividends that is declared in number 7 is 1,500. So this means that the 1,500 dividend that is given to the 750 shares is the additional information or the additional transaction we needed in order for us to have an ending balance of 3,030 pesos. So that's why the entry to record is debit retained earnings 1,500. Of course, the credit is dividends payable. Now let's analyze the dividends payable, the last account under financing activity. We have a beginning balance of 900 and we credited 1,500 for the cash dividend in number 7. The total of the two is 2,400. However, the ending balance is 1,500, which means that there is an additional transaction affecting dividends payable for 1,500 less 900, then less 1,500. So there must be a decrease of 900 pesos, which is a debit to dividends payable. So if dividends payable is debited, it means the credited account is cash because dividends payable is debited if there is a payment of cash dividend. So credit cash for 900 pesos. So this is the additional data number 7. Moreover, aside from doing this, a 2-row transaction analysis in order for us to determine the 900 cash dividend paid, we can just use a 1-row analysis. So where we will only consider the difference between 1,500 and 900. So there is a net increase of 600 pesos under the dividends payable account, which is a credit to dividends payable. In order for us to have an equal left side and right side of the accounting equation, since the right side already has a balance of negative 900, which is the difference of 1,500 and 600, it means that there should be a negative 900 on the left side, which is under the cash and cash equivalent column. And the 900 means that this is the cash paid for dividends. Now we're done with the accounts related to investing and financing activity. Now let's proceed to the accounts related to the operating activity. Since we are preparing the statement of cash flow under the indirect method, we will reconcile the beginning and ending balances of the current liabilities and current accounts just by getting the increases and decreases in these accounts. But first, before we do that, let's compute for the net income before the working capital change. So how do we compute for the net income before working capital changes? So that is the net income of 3,285 pesos. Then add back all the expenses and deduct all the gains or income. So that is 3,285 less the gain on retirement, add back the amortization expense, add back the depreciation, add back the loss on sale of equipment, then less the investment income. So that will give us a net income before working capital changes of 2,790. Now, let's account the increases and decreases in the working capital. So for accounts receivable, so there is an ending of 3,150 and the beginning of 2,100. It means there is an increase in accounts receivable of 1,050 pesos. For inventory, the ending is 2,1, the beginning is 2,4. It means there is a decrease of 300 pesos. Now, let's go to accounts payable. The ending is 2,190 and the beginning is 1,830. It means there is an increase of 360. For accrued expenses that has an ending balance of 3,9 and beginning balance of 3,150, it means that there is an increase of 750 pesos. Then last is the deferred tax liability. So the deferred tax liability has an ending balance of 360 and beginning balance of 270. So the deferred tax liability has an increase of 90 pesos. Now we're done with the accounts related to the operating activities. After this, let's maintain the equality of the accounting equation. So on the right side, we have a total of 3,990. And on the left side, we only have two figures, and that is 750. So the difference between the right side, the liabilities and equity, and the assets, except the cash, the total amount is, so right side minus left side, it means that there must be a 3,240 pesos under the cash and cash equivalent. And this is the cash inflows from operating activity. So again, the cash inflows from operating activities is 3,240. So let's check whether this amount is correct by checking whether the left side and the right side of this particular row are both equal. So the total of the left side is 3,990 and the right side is also at 3,990. Another possible way to check whether the 3,240 is correct is to analyze the cash and cash equivalent column. From the beginning balance, let's consider all the transactions below. Let's check whether the total is 1,500. So the total is 1,500, which is also the ending balance of the cash and cash equivalent. So which means the 3,240 is correct. Now let's check whether the beginning balances, after we consider all transactions during the year, will result to the ending balances. Because these ending balances will obviously have a total asset and total liabilities that are equal in amount because these are given in the problem. So let us ensure that the total of the beginning and all transactions during the year will result to the ending balance. So starting from cash, beginning balance, then add and less all the transactions during the year. So the ending balance is 1,500. So it is the same with the amount given in the problem. So for the accounts receivable, 3,150. So the same. So for inventory, 2,100. Land for 875. Investment in Snapchat 1,800. PPE is 8,700. Accumulated depreciation is negative 1,350. Patent is 450. Accounts payable is 2,190. Accrued expenses is 3,900. Dividends payable is 1,500. Bonds payable is 3,000. Deferred tax liability is 360. Share capital is 3,750. Share premium is 3,495 and retained earnings is 3,030 pesos. Then again, let's check whether the total assets is equal to the total liabilities and equity. So they're both balanced. Now, all the additional procedures are for checking purposes, just to ensure that our procedure is correct in order for us to prepare a correct statement of cash flow. Now, let's prepare the statement of cash flows under the indirect method, starting with net income of 3,285. Then add the adjustments. So we have several nominal accounts related to the investing and financing activities, starting with gain on retirement for 150 pesos. So this is deducted from net income. Next is the amortization. The expense is added back, as well as the depreciation of 300, which is also added back. The loss on sale is also added back for 60 pesos, and the investment income is deducted for 750 pesos. So the total of 3,285 and the adjustments is 2,790. And this is our net income before the working capital changes. Then after this, the increases and decreases in working capital. Again, working capital is the difference between the current assets and current liabilities. Starting with accounts receivable. The accounts receivable is deducted for 1,050 pesos. Again, looking at the accounts receivable on our accounting equation, there is an increase of 1,050 pesos. However, the effect of this on cash is inverse because this is another asset. Always remember that an increase in one asset has an inverse effect on cash and cash equivalent. So that's why if a particular asset increases, the cash account decreases. And if a particular asset decreases, the cash account increases. So next is the inventory for 300. So this is increased because there is a decrease in inventory. Then for accounts payable, so liabilities have a direct relationship with cash. So if liabilities increase, cash will also increase. So for accounts payable, 360 pesos. Accrued expenses, 750 peso increase in cash. And deferred tax liability, 90 peso increase in cash. So 2,790, then get the total after all the increases and decreases in working capital. So we have a 3,240, which is the cash inflow from operating activities. Now, let's proceed to investing and financing activities. So we already considered the 3,214. So the remaining cash transactions are investing and financing. Let's classify the 900. So the 900 is related to the dividend payment, and dividend payment is classified as financing. Next is the 1,350. The 1,350 is the retirement of bonds payable, which is also a financing transaction. Next is 285. which is the proceeds from the sale of equipment, which is under the investing activity. Next is 150. So for the 150 pesos, this is the cash dividend received from the investment in Snapchat. So as we have discussed earlier, dividend received is classified as operating activity. So which means that cash inflows from the operating activity is not 3,250 only. It also includes the 150 pesos, which means that the cash inflow from operating activity is actually at 3,390 pesos. So let's correct the cash inflow from operating activity in our statement of cash flow. So dividend received for 150 pesos. So the revised cash inflow from operating activities must include the 150 pesos. That is why the cash inflow from operating activities is 3,390 pesos. So next is the 1,275 peso. This is the purchase of land for cash, which is an investing activity. So now we're done with the classification. Let's proceed to the statement of cash flow. So for the investing activity, we only have two transactions. So let's start with the acquisition of land for 1,275. Next is the proceeds from sale of equipment, which is 285. And this will give us a 990 cash outflow from operating activities. So for financing transactions, we only have two transactions. So that is retirement of bonds payable for 1,350 pesos. So that is negative. Dividends paid of 900 pesos. So that will give us a 2,250 peso negative, which is a cash outflow from financing activities. Then, let's get the total of the three activities, 3,390 minus 990 and minus 2,250. This will give us an increase in cash and cash equivalent of 150 pesos. Then let's add this to the beginning balance of cash and cash equivalent of 1,350. So our total is 1,500, and this is the ending cash and cash equivalent. So this is the statement of cash flow under the indirect method.